Hi everyone. My name is Lauren Calloway. I'm 34 years old. I live in Austin, Texas. And I need to start by saying something that might sound dramatic, but I promise you, by the time I finish this story, you'll understand exactly why I'm saying it. I went to my ex-husband's wedding. Not because I was invited, not really. It was a mistake, a clerical error that sent me a cream-colored envelope with my name in calligraphy, and instead of throwing it in the trash, I looked at that date circled in gold, and I thought, okay, I'll be there. Now, before you say anything, I now. My best friend Cassidy said everything you're currently thinking and then some. But here's the thing about living through the specific kind of devastation I'm about to describe to you. There comes a point on the other side of it where you stop running from the hard thing and you start walking straight into it with your chin up and your best dress on. That's where I was. That's who I had become. But I need to take you back to the beginning. Because the story, my story, didn't start with a wedding invitation. It started 8 years before that, with a man named Daniel and a version of myself that I loved but probably should have protected a little better. And it started the way so many of these stories start, with me genuinely believing we were going to be okay. If you've ever trusted someone completely and discovered that trust was sitting on a crumbling foundation the whole time, this is for you. Stay with me. I promise the ending is worth it. Daniel Calloway and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party in downtown Austin when I was 25 and he was 28. He was standing near the bar with a drink he wasn't really drinking, looking slightly bored in the best way. Not entitled bored, just the kind of bored that says, I came here for one specific person and now I've found them. That person ended up being me. He introduced himself by asking if I thought the playlist was too on the nose for a birthday party. I said yes. He said he'd been thinking the same thing for 20 minutes. We talked for the rest of the night. He was the kind of man who asked follow-up questions. Who remembered the thing you mentioned in passing and brought it back up 3 weeks later? Who made you feel whenever he gave you his attention, like you were the only person in the room worth paying attention to? I fell for that, hard and without reservation. Because at 25, I didn't fully understand that the men who are best at making you feel seen are sometimes the ones who learn your entire architecture. Not because they love you unconditionally, but because they are very, very good at people. I'm not saying he didn't love me. I think he did. For a while. I'm just saying that when I look back now, I understand some things about Daniel that I didn't understand at 25 or even 32. We dated for 3 years. 3 good years, genuinely. We traveled. We built a life together in pieces, the way you do when you're young, and everything feels like an exciting project. An apartment first, then a house, then a dog. A golden retriever mix we named Chester, who had the emotional intelligence of a licensed therapist and the manners of a disaster. I was working in marketing. Daniel was in business development at a mid-sized software company. We were comfortable, happy, building. I was 28 when we got married. September outside San Antonio, 60 people, a live bluegrass band, and the most golden evening sky I have ever seen in my entire life. My mother cried from the moment she arrived until well after the last dance. His parents flew in from Ohio. His sister Bethany hugged me so hard at the reception that I laughed. I felt that evening like I had arrived somewhere, like the coordinates of my life had finally all pointed to the right place and I was standing on solid ground. I want to hold on to that feeling for a second before I tell you what happened to it. Because it was real. It existed. Whatever came after doesn't take it away. The years immediately after the wedding were good, even if they were also the years where I started making small decisions that added up to something I wouldn't have chosen if I'd been paying closer attention. Daniel got a new job offer. Better money, better title, a fast-growing company. I was proud of him. The new job required long hours and an occasional weekend and a lot of his mental energy, and I adjusted around that the way you do when you love someone and you think of your partnership as a team. I let some things slide in my own career, a position that would have required relocating to Dallas, a freelance opportunity that felt too risky when we were talking about starting a family, a promotion I didn't fight for because the timing felt wrong. They were all small decisions, reasonable decisions. the kind that seem completely sensible in the moment and only look like a pattern when you view them from a distance. By the time Daniel started at Holloway Meridian, Vivian's company, I had been at the same marketing consulting firm for 4 years and I was comfortable but not growing. Not really. I told myself that was okay. I told myself my turn would come. I was rooting for him with everything I had. Daniel mentioned Vivian Holloway the same week he started at Holloway Meridian, which in retrospect makes complete sense, but at the time felt like nothing, just the name of an impressive boss at a new and exciting job. He described her the way you describe a force of nature. Self-made, Harvard MBA had built Holloway Meridian from a two-person operation to a 60-person firm in 7 years. She was 42, wildly successful, and according to Daniel, the smartest person in any room she walked into. "She's kind of extraordinary," he said over dinner the first week. "In a good way or an intimidating way?" I asked. He thought about it. "Both," he said. "Both is good." I smiled and asked him to pass the bread, and that was the end of that. The first few months at Holloway Meridian were transformative for Daniel in a way that, honestly, I found beautiful to watch. He was energized again, walking taller, coming home lit up about problems he was solving and strategies he was developing. He talked about work the way he'd talked about our early years together, with actual enthusiasm, with investment, with his whole self engaged. I told my mother over the phone one evening while he was still at the office, "He seems so like himself right now, like the version of him I fell in love with." She said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart." I said, "Yeah, it really is." I was still saying that 2 months later when I should have been asking different questions, because around month 3 there were small things. Tiny things. The kind your rational brain has 17 explanations for and your gut has exactly one. The gym, suddenly, at 6 a.m. on weekdays. A new cologne I didn't recognize. His phone, always previously left on the counter or the coffee table or wherever he happened to drop it, was now face down on every surface all the time. He started texting less during the day, which he explained as being slammed at work, which I believed because he was, objectively, slammed at work. But the phone thing nagged at me in a way I couldn't quite shake. I am not a suspicious person by nature. I want to say that because it's important. I am not someone who checks phones or scrolls through messages or operates from a place of constant low-grade paranoia. I am someone who trusts until the trust is broken, which has its advantages and its disadvantages. And one of the disadvantages is that you sometimes don't break the trust until you have to hit it with something pretty substantial. I talked myself out of what I was noticing for longer than I should have. I had a running internal argument between my gut, which kept raising its hand, and my rational brain, which kept shutting it down. Every time something pinged my instinct, I cataloged it, contextualized it, filed it under probably nothing, and I kept choosing to believe we were fine. Vivian started hosting dinner parties about 8 months into Daniel's tenure at the firm. Small affairs at her penthouse in downtown Austin. 8 to 12 people, partners included, an elegant way of building loyalty and culture among her senior team. The first time we went, I dressed up more than I needed to and felt slightly nervous in the elevator on the way up. I don't know what I expected. Someone cold, maybe. Corporate. The kind of woman who commands a room through sheer intimidation. Instead, the doors opened to warmth. Actual warmth. The kind she was clearly skilled at creating. Low lighting, beautiful flowers, a dinner table set with the kind of care that says, "You matter enough to put effort into this." Vivian herself met us at the door in a way that felt genuinely welcoming, not performative. She refilled wine glasses before you asked. She remembered the name of your dog from something Daniel had mentioned in passing at work. She asked questions, real questions, not cocktail party filler, and then listened to the answers with her full attention. "She's remarkable," I told Cassidy the next morning. Like, I wanted to not like her and I couldn't manage it. "Be careful with people like that," Cassidy said. "Why do people keep saying that like it's a warning?" I said. Cassidy just looked at me. The dinner parties became a regular rhythm. Every 5 or 6 weeks, a small group of us gathered in that penthouse with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the art on the walls that I was pretty sure cost more than our mortgage. I became comfortable there, I liked some of the other partners. I had conversations I genuinely enjoyed. I started to feel like Vivian's world was a nice place to be adjacent to. And I watched, without fully processing what I was watching, the way Daniel was in that space. Brighter, more expressive. He told better stories. He laughed more easily. He was, in that penthouse, the most alive version of himself I had seen in years. I thought it was the job. I thought it was the success. I thought he had finally found his people. There was an evening on the balcony, mid-October. The city spread out below us, someone telling a funny story about a camping trip gone wrong. When I looked over at Daniel mid-laugh and found that he wasn't watching a storyteller, he was watching Vivian, and it was the specific private kind of looking that bypasses the casual and goes somewhere else entirely. There was a softness in it. There was hunger in it. There was, if I am being completely honest with myself, a tenderness in it that I realized in that same terrible second he had not directed at me in quite some time. And she caught him, just for a fraction of a second, and she smiled. Barely, privately, like a small acknowledgement between two people who have an entire unspoken vocabulary already established. I looked away. My stomach dropped about 14 floors. I went inside and poured myself another glass of wine and stood in her kitchen and told myself I had imagined it. That I was being paranoid, that I was projecting, that the worst thing I could do was create a problem that didn't exist. I did not imagine it. I just wasn't ready to know that yet. The next 3 months are ones I have replayed many times looking for the moment I could have intervened. I've come to the conclusion that there wasn't one, not because I couldn't have seen it, but because I was doing everything in my power not to. And I think there's something deeply human about that. When the thing you're afraid of is also the thing that would dismember your life completely, you develop a remarkable ability to look just slightly to the left of it. Daniel became an absence inside a body. Present, technically. Sitting at dinner, sleeping in the same bed, occasionally laughing at something on television. But somewhere else entirely the rest of the time. Conversations felt abbreviated. Not hostile. Never hostile. Just truncated. Like someone had taken the full version of our communication and left me only the summary. I tried. This is the part I need to say clearly because it matters. I tried. I booked a weekend away to Fredericksburg, wine country, the kind of trip we'd done in our early years and loved. He was pleasant the whole time, but I came home feeling somehow lonelier than if we'd just stayed home. I suggested couples therapy, framing it carefully, gently as maintenance rather than emergency. He said we didn't need it, but agreed we could go if I wanted, in the tone of someone agreeing to try a restaurant they don't think they'll like. We didn't go. One night, lying in the dark after we turned the lights off, I asked him directly, "Are we okay?" He turned toward me, and he said with genuine seeming calm, "Of course we are. Why would you even ask that?" And I thought, maybe I am the problem. Maybe I am creating drama in my own head. Maybe I am so convinced something is wrong that I'm manifesting distance where there isn't any. I believed him. I wanted to, so I did. February came, a Wednesday morning. We'd had a stupid argument whose turn it was to deal with the car registration, of all things, and Daniel had left for work with tension in his shoulders, and I'd felt that familiar hollow feeling settle in my chest. I had the day off. I was home trying to shake the mood, doing nothing in particular. I knocked his laptop off the nightstand by accident. It was balanced on a stack of books, a stupid place to leave it, and it hit the floor and popped open, and the browser was already loaded. And before I had consciously decided to read anything, I was reading it. An email chain between Daniel and Vivian. I won't quote it to you in detail, but I will tell you what it told me. 7 months. They had been together for 7 months. The emails were not ambiguous. They were intimate, specific, personal in the way that only exists between people who are deeply in each other's lives. There were conversations in those emails about the future, about what came next. about what things would look like when, not if, the current situation changed. There was a line where Daniel wrote about me, about our marriage, in a way that was not cruel. He didn't call me names, didn't degrade me, but that showed me with absolute clarity that I had become, in his mind, the thing that was in the way of what he actually wanted. A problem to be managed toward a solution. I sat down on the bedroom floor. I didn't cry immediately. My brain just went very, very quiet, the way it does in the seconds after a car accident before the pain registers. I sat there with my back against the bed, and I looked at the sunlight coming through the window, and I thought, so that is what this has been. I waited all day. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I didn't call anyone. I just moved through the house in a strange suspended state, making coffee I didn't drink, starting sentences out loud that had no one to receive them, walking from room to room with no destination. I was still home alone with Chester at 7 p.m., sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop open in front of me when I heard Daniel's key in the door. He walked in and stopped immediately. He saw the laptop. He saw my face, and the expression that crossed his, recognition, calculation, and something almost like relief mixed with dread, told me everything I needed to know about exactly how conscious this choice had been. I said, "How long?" Not a question. Two flat words. He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down and didn't say anything for what felt like a full minute. Then he said, "Lauren, how long, Daniel?" He looked at the table. Then he looked at me, and he told me. And he told me 7 months. It had started the previous July. He hadn't planned it, he said that, and I believe he believed it. Though I'm not sure it makes a difference. He was sorry, he cared about me. He hadn't known how to tell me. He'd been confused and scared, and he kept thinking it would resolve itself somehow. And then he said the thing. He said, "I think I've been in love with her for a while now." The way he said it, quietly, with what seemed like actual grief, was almost more awful than if he'd been callous about it. There was an apology woven through it. There was this awful tenderness toward what he was doing, as though hurting me gently was something he was giving me. I said, very quietly, "I need you to leave tonight." He started to say something. "Lauren, we should talk, we should." And I said again, still quietly, "I need you to leave tonight, Daniel." He went to his brother's. He was out of the house within 2 hours with a single suitcase. I stood in the driveway and watched his car pull away, and the moment it turned the corner, I sat down on the front step, and I cried. The kind that is mostly silent, mostly just breath and shaking. The kind that comes when your body finally catches up to what your mind has known for too long. Chester came and sat next to me. Dogs know. I have never loved that dog more than I did in that moment. Cassidy was at my door in 20 minutes. Whataburger in one hand, wine in the other, a fury on my behalf that I didn't have the bandwidth for yet, but that I needed to exist somewhere. She held me while I cried and said all the right things. She said he was an absolute idiot. She said I was going to be okay. She said I was the best thing that had ever happened to him, and he was going to figure that out when it was too late. I didn't believe any of it yet, but I filed it away for later. The weeks that followed were administrative and devastating in equal measure. I had a lawyer named Rebecca who was efficient and kind, and treated the whole process with exactly the right amount of professional calm. The house went on the market. We built equity in it, which meant splitting that equity, which meant decisions made at a conference table while sitting across from the man I'd married on that September evening and trying to think only in numbers. Daniel got half of everything. That's the law, and I'd known it going in. But there's a particular quality to the reality of watching your shared life itemized into 2 columns: the retirement account, the savings, the car we'd bought together, the dog. They actually have to sort out the dog, which felt obscene. Daniel said he'd be happy for me to keep Chester because Vivian was allergic. He said that like it was just information. Vivian is allergic. Already so thoroughly embedded in that life that her details tumbled out of his mouth naturally in the middle of a conversation about our divorce. I kept Chester. Obviously. Chester had nothing to do with any of this and deserved stability. 3 weeks into the process, while papers were still being filed, While nothing was yet settled, Vivian called me. I picked up because I didn't recognize the number. I almost never don't pick up unfamiliar numbers because I have a deep-seated anxiety about missed calls, which tells you something about who I am as a person. Her voice was exactly as I remembered it. Smooth. Measured. The particular register of someone who is very used to controlling a room. She said she wanted me to hear things from her directly. She said she knew this was painful. She said she respected me as a person and hoped that with time I would understand that feelings don't always align with what's convenient, and that she was genuinely sorry for the pain this had caused me. I let her finish. The whole thing. I did not interrupt, and then I said, I want you to know that I don't respect you at all, and I hope that's something you sit with. I hung up. I put the phone face down on my empty kitchen counter. Half the furniture was already gone by then. And I looked out the window and I let myself feel all of it. The humiliation. The rage that was finally catching up to the grief. The profound strangeness of having your life restructured by someone else's choice and being expected to navigate it gracefully. And then, underneath all of that, something quieter started to form. Not a plan. Not yet. Just a decision. I am not going to disappear. The first months post-divorce were not cinematic. There was no montage. There was no meaningful moment of standing in a field with my arms spread wide while inspiring music played. There was just getting up, making coffee, going to work, coming home, feeding the dog, getting back in the now enormous bed. But inside the ordinariness, something was happening. I had been at the same marketing consulting firm for 4 years, and I was good at my job and not growing. I could see that clearly now, the way you can sometimes only see the shape of something after you've stepped back from it. I had made myself smaller than I needed to be. I had arranged my professional life around someone else's trajectory so consistently that I'd lost track of what mine was supposed to look like. That stopped. I enrolled in a leadership development program I'd been nudging off for 2 years. I returned the email from Patricia Ng, a senior executive who'd been trying to get coffee with me for months, and finally sat down with her. I registered for a conference in Nashville that I'd skipped the previous 2 years because Daniel always had something happening that weekend. I got on the plane alone. I went. Priscilla later told me that she'd noticed something different in me that year. You were paying attention differently, she said. Like someone had removed a layer of noise. That's exactly what it felt like. Nashville was where everything changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the way real shifts happen, which is usually through a conversation you couldn't have predicted having. I was in the hotel coffee line on the second morning when I met Sandra Okafor. Sandra was the chief strategy officer at Apex Tier, a tech consulting firm that I would later come to understand was Holloway Meridian's most significant direct competitor in the Austin market. She was in her mid-40s, brilliant and blunt in the specific way of someone who has long since stopped performing for rooms she doesn't care about. We got to talking in that easy, slightly euphoric way that happens at conferences where you're both tired and slightly over-caffeinated and you've just heard 4 presentations that said the same thing in slightly different fonts. We skipped the afternoon session together. We talked through lunch and over drinks that evening, and by the end of it, I felt for the first time in many months like myself. Not the recovering version, not the managing version, just myself. At the end of the night, she handed me her card and said, I want to talk to you properly when we're back home. I think you're exactly what we've been missing at Apex. I went to my room and lay on my back looking at the ceiling and thought, okay, here we go. The interview process took 6 months, 5 rounds, 2 strategy presentations, a panel with 3 members of the executive team, a case study that I worked on for 3 weekends. I was going through the final paperwork of the divorce at the same time, which meant that my life existed simultaneously in 2 completely different registers, one of loss and one of building, and somehow holding both of those at once was the thing that finally made me feel stable. Like I was too busy becoming someone to have time to keep being broken, Apex Tier offered me Senior Vice President of Client Strategy in October. The salary made me read the number 3 times. An office with a view. A team of 12. Real authority, real scope. I accepted on a Tuesday morning, sitting in my car outside my old office, wearing a blazer I'd bought specifically for important signings because I believe in dressing for the life you're building toward. I called my mother. She cried. I called Cassidy. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then I sat in my car in the parking lot with Chester's leash on the passenger seat. I'd been walking him on my lunch break since the divorce. And I let myself feel it, the full size of it. I thought about Daniel, about Vivienne, about that September evening, about the woman who had gotten smaller and smaller over 8 years without fully noticing. That woman was still in me. But she had company now. I want to pause here for a second, because I think if you've been listening to this, you might be wondering, is there a twist coming? Has something already happened that I haven't told you about? Yes, and yes. 9 months after the divorce was finalized, I received, at my new apartment, a thick cream envelope, my name on the front in calligraphy, the kind of stationery that signals money without announcing it. I opened it at my kitchen counter on a Tuesday night. I was wearing an old t-shirt and eating leftover pasta, and I genuinely expected it to be something professional or legal. It was a wedding invitation. Daniel Calloway and Vivian Holloway. March 15th. The Rosewood Mansion at Turtle Creek, Dallas. Black tie, dinner and dancing to follow. I read it 3 times. I turned it over. I looked at my own name on the envelope, handwritten, and I genuinely thought that maybe I had missed some kind of context where this made sense. Here's what happened. Daniel and I had lived in the same apartment complex early in our relationship, and when I moved into my current apartment post-divorce, my new address happened to share a zip code with that old one. Vivienne's assistant had been working from an old contacts list and had not cross-referenced. It was a mistake, a pure clerical error. I was not supposed to receive this invitation, but I had it in my hands, and the date was 11 weeks away, and the venue was a 5-star hotel in Dallas, and I sat with it for a long time before I put it down. I told Cassidy the next day. She had the reaction you would expect. Loudly, thoroughly negative. Several questions about my mental health. A very loving but extremely pointed speech about self-preservation and healing and why going to your ex-husband's wedding to the woman he cheated on you with was maybe not the most emotionally sound choice available. All reasonable, all correct probably, from a strictly therapeutic standpoint. But then Sandra Okafor called. She called on a Thursday evening, 3 days after I'd received the invitation, like the universe had simply been waiting for the right dramatic beat. And she said, "Lauren, I need to tell you something about Vivian Holloway that I think you deserve to know." Sandra had been suspicious for about 14 months. Holloway Meridian had been winning client pitches they shouldn't have won. Not just beating Apex on strategy, but arriving at pitches with a level of specific knowledge about Apex's proposals and client relationships that didn't make competitive sense. Someone, somewhere, had access to information they shouldn't have. It had taken her legal and investigative teams the better part of a year to trace it back to a source. And when they found it, the source turned out to be a consultant Apex had brought in on a short-term contract 18 months prior. A consultant who, at the time, was also in a relationship with the CEO of Holloway Meridian. Daniel had been given limited access to Apex's client management systems during his contract period, standard for the scope of work he'd been brought in to do. What was not standard was that he had quietly extracted proprietary client information, internal strategy documents, and competitive positioning data that was then, somehow, reflected in the pitches Holloway Meridian made against those same Apex clients in the following months. 2 major accounts had left Apex. The financial impact was significant. The legal exposure was real. Sandra was careful to tell me something important. There was no evidence that Vivienne had directly directed the data breach or was aware of its specifics. She may have benefited from information that was provided to her without full disclosure of how it was obtained. That was for the courts to determine. What was clear was that the documentation existed, that the timeline was damning, and that Daniel was centrally implicated. The civil suit from Apex against Holloway Meridian was being finalized. The filings were going to be a matter of public record. The news was going to move through the business community. The question was timing. I sat very still on my couch while Sandra told me all of this. Chester had his head in my lap. The television was on with the sound off. When she finished, I said, "Sandra, what if I told you I accidentally received an invitation to their wedding?" There was a silence. And then Sandra said, "Lauren, tell me everything." I want to be precise about what happened next, because I think the word revenge gets applied to stories like mine in ways that flatten the actual truth of it. What Sandra did, filing a civil suit, pursuing legal remedies for real damages caused to her company, was legitimate, professional, entirely proper. She would have done it regardless of whether I had ever received that invitation or attended that wedding, or been involved in any way. The suit existed on its own terms. What I did was decide not to stay home. I RSVP'd yes. I wrote attending one on the response card in my best handwriting, sealed the return envelope, and put it in the mail on a Saturday morning before I could talk myself out of it. Then I called Cassidy, who took approximately 45 seconds to move from horror to planning mode, which is one of the many reasons I love her. "We need a dress," she said. "I have a dress." "Not the right dress. We're going shopping." We found it at a boutique near South Congress. Emerald green. Floor length. The kind of structured elegance that doesn't announce itself but doesn't need to. The kind of dress that makes you stand up a full inch taller the moment you put it on. Cassidy got a deep burgundy gown that she described as fully supportive, but I also refused to be invisible. In the 11 weeks between RSVP and the wedding date, Sandra's legal team filed the civil suit. The paperwork was processed and became public record. Sandra made sure, quietly, without spectacle, that several of the more business-connected individuals on Vivian's guest list were aware of the proceedings before they arrived at a ballroom to celebrate her. She didn't make it a campaign. She didn't orchestrate anything dramatic. She simply made sure the truth was already in the right rooms before the wedding started. I spent those 11 weeks going to work, building my team, doing my job with the kind of focus that comes when you have finally found the thing you were meant to be doing. I had hard nights. I won't pretend otherwise. Nights where I lay awake running to every possible way this could go badly. Nights where the whole plan seemed insane and self-destructive, and exactly the kind of thing I'd counsel a friend against. But in the mornings, I always came back to the same feeling: I am not hiding. That was the whole of it, really. Not revenge. Not even justice. That was Sandra's department. Just the refusal to disappear from a story that I had lived through and come out the other side of. I was going to be present for the end of it. I was going to stand in that room, upright and intact, and then I was going to go home and keep building my life. That's all I was going to do. I drove to Dallas the afternoon of the 14th. Cassidy rode with me. We talked the whole way about work, about her boyfriend Marcus, about a podcast we'd both been obsessed with, about everything except what we were actually driving toward. That's a specific skill of best friendships. The ability to talk around the enormous thing sitting in the car with you without making it smaller. We checked into the Rosewood Mansion. I had booked a standard room on a floor entirely separate from the wedding block. It seemed important to occupy the same physical space and also to have my own completely separate territory within it. The morning of the 15th, I woke up calm in a way that continued to surprise me. I had been expecting nerves, the performance anxiety kind that makes your hands shake. Instead, I felt settled. Quieter than I'd felt in months, actually, as though the proximity to the whole thing had burned off all the excess energy I'd been carrying and left something simpler underneath. I had breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Eggs. Coffee. A mimosa because it seemed like the kind of morning that warranted one. I watched the hotel come alive around me, staff setting up for the event, flowers being carried through the lobby on carts, the wedding party visible in glimpses through the windows as people arrived. I put on the emerald dress at 3:30. Cassidy zipped it and stepped back and looked at me with an expression that was both emotional and triumphant in equal measure. "Okay," she said. "Let's go." The ceremony was outdoors, in the hotel's garden. White florals everywhere, abundant to the point of extravagance, string lights strung overhead between the old trees, 300 chairs, a string quartet. The sky was cooperating, blue and clear and slightly warm for March. I sat near the back. I didn't hide, but I didn't announce myself. I was simply there, a woman in a green dress who arrived early enough to be settled before the room filled. Daniel's colleague Mark saw me near the garden entrance before the ceremony and stopped mid-stride. His expression moved through confusion, recognition, and then something unreadable. I gave him a small, composed nod. He returned it and moved on. A woman behind me, I didn't catch who, whispered to her companion. I caught fragments, his ex-wife, and then something I didn't hear. I straightened my spine and kept my eyes forward. The ceremony started 10 minutes behind schedule. Vivienne entered to something orchestral and dignified and moved down the white floral aisle with the absolute unruffled confidence of someone who has spent decades believing the world organizes itself around her entry into rooms. She was breathtaking. I will not lie to you about that. The dress, the veil, the carriage of her, all of it was perfect, in the specific way that perfect things are when someone very smart, with very good taste has had unlimited resources and a compelling reason to care. Daniel was at the altar. I watched his face when he saw her coming, watched the expression that broke through, that lit up, activated, completely present look, the one I had spent years chasing. I felt something when I saw that. I want to be honest. It moved through me like a wave, not grief exactly, more like recognition, like finally seeing the complete shape of something you'd only ever seen in pieces. Like the last portion of a picture clicking into place. And then I thought about who I was right now, where I was working, what I had built, my apartment, Chester at home with the neighbor who was watching him, Cassidy, 2 rows back in her burgundy dress, a steady anchor in my peripheral vision. The wave passed. I was okay, more than okay. The ballroom was everything you'd expect from a Vivian Holloway production. Lavish without being gaudy, every detail considered, the kind of event that communicates money through restraint rather than excess. Crystal and candlelight, centerpieces that were almost too beautiful to look at directly. The cocktail hour was uncomfortable in the specific way that belongs to situations nobody has an etiquette script for. I moved through the room and I felt the awareness of people knowing who I was, the subtle recalibration that happened in various phases when they placed me. That small social flinch of, oh, she's the ex-wife. What do I do with this? Most people chose nothing. I understood. Daniel's sister Bethany found me near the appetizers table about 20 minutes in. She looked at me with an expression that contained a very complicated mixture of emotions, warmth, discomfort, confusion, something that might have been guilty admiration. "Lauren," she said quietly. "Hi, Beth," I said. "How are the kids?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then, "You look absolutely incredible." "So do you," I said. "Truly." She walked away shaking her head, which I think was the most honest and human response possible. I had been seated, through some mix-up in the table cards, at a table of Vivian's extended family and a few business contacts who had no particular reason to know who I was. This was actually the best possible outcome. We had a perfectly pleasant conversation about the Dallas art scene and a recent food festival and someone's recent trip to Portugal. I was, for the duration of the meal, just a woman in a green dress at a wedding. Then, I felt it, the particular sensation of being watched, not casually, but with focus. I looked up from my third course and found Daniel at the head table. He had gone completely still. His face was doing something I hadn't seen in years. Genuine, unguarded shock. The kind your body produces before your brain can manage it. He was looking at me the way you look at something you absolutely did not expect to be real. I held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then I smiled, not warmly, not coldly, just a smile that acknowledged his existence and nothing else. A smile that said, "I'm here. I'm fine. I hope you're well. Good luck tonight." And then I looked back at my plate and resumed eating. Cassidy, seated at a table to my left, caught my eye and mouthed something that I believe was iconic. The speeches started after dinner. The best man, the maid of honor, a woman named Claire who had clearly rehearsed and was doing her level best, despite the fact that by halfway through her speech, the room had developed an alternate current of conversation underneath it. Because at a table near the front, two men who had been talking quietly since the entrees arrived were no longer quite quiet enough. Something about the acoustics of the room, that particular combination of high ceilings and ambient music and 300 people generating collective sound, meant that a conversation pitched for two was traveling significantly further. The Apex filing. I got a call from my attorney this morning about it. The data breach claim? I heard. Apparently the discovery phase is going to be extensive. The timing is, I know. The maid of honor pushed forward with her speech, slightly louder now. But the current moved regardless. I watched it happen, the way information moves through a room of people who are professionally interconnected and alert. A murmur here, a leaned-in conversation there, a glance across tables. The specific quickening of attention that happens when something relevant enters the air. I watched Vivian's face through all of it. She was seated at the head table in her extraordinary dress, with her immaculate composure, and she was listening to Claire's speech with every ounce of discipline she possessed. But I'd sat at her dinner table enough times to know how to read her. I could see the effort, the stillness that wasn't relaxed, the smile that was slightly too consistent, the way she was present in the room and also somewhere else entirely, doing calculations. And I thought, there's the crack. Not a collapse. Not a scene. Just a hairline fracture in all that polished certainty. It was enough. I stepped out during the dancing portion of the evening to get some air in the wide, quiet hallway that ran along the outside of the ballroom. The music was muffled through the doors. I stood near a tall window that looked out over the Dallas skyline, lit up and glowing and entirely unbothered by anything happening in the building in front of it. I was holding a glass of champagne. I wasn't drinking and thinking about nothing specific, just letting the evening settle in my body, when I heard footsteps and then she was there. Vivian. She came to stand beside me at the window. Her veil was gone. A few strands of hair had loosened from the updo, but she was still completely, precisely herself. That composure that functioned like weather, like climate, like something you existed inside of, rather than something she performed. We stood in silence for a moment. Two women at a window. Her wedding reception 40 feet away. She said, "I know you didn't plan this." "The invitation was a mistake," I said. "I probably should have thrown it away." "But you didn't." "No." Silence again. She was looking at the skyline. She said, "I hear you're at Apex now. Senior VP of Client Strategy." "Since October." Something moved in her face. A real response, not a managed one. She said, "Then you know about the filing." "I know about the filing." She nodded slowly, swirled her champagne. I noticed she wasn't drinking it either. Then she said something I hadn't anticipated. She said, "I want you to know that I didn't know the source of what Daniel was sharing with me. I found out when Sandra's team brought it forward. Whatever else you think of me, and you have every right to think what you think. I did not ask him to do that." I looked at her for a long, careful moment. I looked for the management of narrative, the spin, the self-protection dressed as honesty. I am a strategist by profession. I know how to read a room. Maybe it was there. Maybe she was performing. Maybe I was being managed even in that hallway. Or maybe she was telling the truth. I still don't know. And the thing is, it doesn't really change what is. I said, "I believe you or I don't. It doesn't change much for me either way." She was quiet. "Vivienne," I said, "I came here tonight because I needed to know I could be in the same room as all of this and still be standing, and I am. So." I set my champagne on the windowsill. "I genuinely hope you're actually happy," I said. Not politely. Genuinely. "I hope what you built all of this on is real, and I hope it holds." Because the alternative is just sadder than I have energy to be sad about. She looked at me, and I thought I saw something real in that, something that lived underneath the composure. Something tired, maybe, or surprised, or both. I didn't wait for her response. I walked back into the ballroom, found Cassidy, and said, "I'm ready." She looked at my face and immediately stood up and got her purse. "Part Fornden, Waffles AT 10 p.m. And what Cassidy say?" "10 sir what?" Cassidy said. "We found a diner 4 blocks from the hotel." A proper Texas diner with bright lights and a counter and laminated menus that had been the same for probably 30 years. We slid into a booth and Cassidy ordered the waffles with powdered sugar before the server finished introducing herself. I ordered the same. We sat there in our formal dresses, in a brightly lit diner eating waffles at 10 p.m., and I told Cassidy everything. The ceremony, the cocktail hour, Daniel's face, the business conversation rippling through the ballroom, the hallway with Vivienne. She listened without interrupting, which is extremely unlike her and tells you exactly how much she understood this to be a moment that needed space. When I finished, she put her fork down and looked at me. "How do you feel?" she said. I thought about it, actually thought about it, not just reaching for the first serviceable answer. "Like something that was very heavy just got set down somewhere," I said. "Like I was carrying all this, the anger and the grief and the humiliation and the whole story, and now I've just kind of put it on the table, and I can walk away from the table." She nodded slowly. "That's what closure actually feels like," she said. "Not dramatic, not triumphant, just done." "Yeah." She picked up her fork again. "Also," she said, "for the record, you were the most stunning person in that room. And I say that as someone who spent 4 hours on my hair." I laughed. For the first time all evening, completely genuinely. The kind of laugh that comes from your whole chest. We ate our waffles and talked about everything and nothing and drove home to Austin with the windows down and the radio on, and I looked at the highway lights going past and thought, "Okay, that chapter is closed. Let's see what comes next." It's been about 6 months since the wedding. The civil suit from Apex against Holloway Meridian moved forward through the courts. 3 major client relationships were named in the discovery documents. The reputational damage within Austin's tech consulting community was real and significant. I'll be honest with you, Vivian's company did not collapse. She is too smart and too well-resourced for that, and I never wanted it to collapse anyway. I wanted the truth to be documented. Official. Permanent. That's what happened. The truth is now documented, official and permanent. Daniel's own legal exposure from the data breach is still being assessed. I am not a party to the proceedings. My name appears nowhere in the filings. I chose that deliberately. This was never my suit to attach myself to. What happened with Apex happened to Apex. Sandra and her team are handling it exactly as they should. What I know is that by the time the news cycle ran its natural course, the wedding that had been featured in 2 Austin Society pages was being discussed in a rather different context by people in those same professional circles. Not because I orchestrated anything, because the truth was doing what the truth always does, moving at its own pace toward its own conclusions. I was not in any of those Society page photographs. I attended, I witnessed, I had waffles, I went home. That felt exactly right. As for Daniel, I've had a lot of time to think about what I feel toward him now, and the most accurate word I can find is distance. Not coldness, not active hatred, just the particular distance you feel from something that used to be at the center of your life and is now simply no longer there. I wish him the ability to become a better version of himself. That's not a performance of grace. It's genuinely what I have left when I look in his direction. I hope what he found was real. I hope it holds. I hope at some point he does the work of understanding what he chose and why and what it costs people when someone makes that kind of choice. But that's his work to do, not mine. Chester is magnificent. He sleeps diagonally across the full queen bed every night, and I let him because it's our apartment and we operate without rules now. He is the most emotionally intelligent being I have ever shared a home with, and I plan to write his name into my will, which Cassidy says is completely reasonable and also a little much. Cassidy is using this story as her primary social asset at every dinner party she attends, which is exactly what best friends are for, and which I have given her my full blessing to continue. Sandra and I have developed a genuine friendship, the kind built from going through something hard together and coming out of it trusting each other. We're working on a joint initiative between Apex and a nonprofit that supports women re entering the workforce mid career. It's early, it's good. It feels like the kind of thing that matters. And me, I am good. I am genuinely, quietly, solidly good. I go to work and I do something I'm proud of. I come home to an apartment that feels like mine, just mine. No compromise of space, no negotiation of design, no one else's preferences quietly rearranging mine. I started yoga on Sunday mornings in a park near my building, which is deeply not the person I used to be, and I love it completely. I am reading more, sleeping deeply, making plans I'm excited about. I am not bitter. I want to say that clearly finally because I know that when women tell stories like this, people wait for the bitterness. Like the acceptable endings are either collapsed or vengeful. Like those are the only two lanes available when someone hurts you that badly. But there's a third thing. You just keep going. You get quieter and more certain, and you keep going. You stop carrying the story of what they did to you as though it defines the current chapter. You put it on the table, and you walk away from the table, and you go have waffles in your best dress with your best friend. That's not a dramatic ending. I know it isn't. But it's the real one, and it is, I promise you, deeply satisfying in a way that the dramatic ones can never quite be, because it belongs entirely to you. If you're sitting with your own version of this story right now, maybe you're in the early part, the floor part, the making coffee and just surviving part. I just want to say the floor is a place you visit, not a place you live. You get up, you make the coffee, you say yes to the conference, you take the meeting, you buy the dress when the time comes. You don't have to be okay yet. You just have to not disappear. If this story hit something in you, drop a comment. I read every single one. Tell me where you are in your own story, or tell me about the moment it finally turned, or just say hello if you needed to feel less alone tonight. That's what this is for. Subscribe if you want to hear more. There are more stories. There always are. Take care of yourselves. Good night.